Welcome to Chapter 13. Tonight we are going to look at race and ethnicity. So let's look at some definitions. So let's look at the difference between racial and ethnic groups. Racial groups are groups that are set apart from others because of physical differences, and these differences have taken on social significance over a period of time. So in the United States, we have four main racial groups: Black, White, Asian, and Hispanic. However, we're going to look at how the U.S. Census looks at the category of Hispanic in a moment. But these are our main racial groups in the United States. Whereas ethnic groups are set apart because of either natural origin or distinctive cultural patterns, right? So these cultural patterns that we're talking about, whether it be language or food or sports or the way you dress, and along with them comes traditions and values and beliefs and norms too. So is where Asian would be a racial group, Korean or Chinese or Vietnamese would be an ethnic group. So that's the distinction between them. And sometimes the distinction is not always clear cut about where someone actually belongs as far as race and ethnicity. Minority groups are subordinate groups whose members have significantly less control or power over their own lives than the member of the dominant or majority group. The most important word in this sentence is the word power. And from a sociological perspective, minority groups have nothing to do with the numbers, population numbers, and everything to do with how much power each group has. So even there can be a situation where population-wise, a group is dominating in the numbers, but if they don't have the power, they are still considered to be a minority group. And we could see that most clearly with the apartheid in South Africa. So again, minority groups, how much power does a group have? So in the United States, race and ethnicity historically have been markers of minority group status, right? And if we have a minority group, that means we have to have a majority group. And the majority group in the United States, as of now, because remember we're talking about power, who has the power, who runs the businesses, who's in the government, is mostly white males. So let's look at where this definition of race, where this concept of race comes from. So we're going to look at how race is socially constructed. Right? One of the questions we could ask is, can you use biology to determine race? And the answer is no. Right? The answer is no. This is a social construction. Society creates these categories and makes these categories significant. So racial formation is the process. It's a socio-historical, based on society, based on history, a socio-historical process in which racial categories are created, inhibited, transformed, and destroyed. Right? So to look at, this biological concept of race, there is a major undertaking called the Human Genome Project. And they tried to see, can we use genes, can we use genetics, can we use DNA to determine whether someone belongs to one race or another? And the answer was they could not, right? They found that all humans share the same basic genetic material, right? And if we look at skin color just looks at different combinations of the same shared genes. So the conclusion was that, that race is it's a social concept. There's no biological basis to what we consider race. And one of the ways that we could see this look is if we look at other countries, right? In the United States, we have Black, White, Asian, Hispanic. If we go to South America, they look at skin color gradients, right? So how dark to how light someone's skin is. And they actually have, over 40 groupings of racial categories. If we look at, how arbitrary things are, how come, someone's skin color determines the race, but their hair color doesn't? How come, redheads are in a different racial group than blondes or brunettes? And the answer is because society says they're not, right? It all comes down to society. It's all society based, right? At one point, there was something called the one-drop rule, which said this was during slavery times, if a person had a single drop of black blood, they were considered to be black, even if they appeared white, even if they were as white and as pale as can be. If they had one drop of black blood, they were considered to be black. So these are just ways that over history we have defined race. And we're going to come back to that in a second. And we can see this more clearly if we look at the racial categories that exist. This is on page 301 in your textbook. So if we go back over history to 1790, when they started taking the census in 1790, the categories were free white males, free white females, all other free persons, and then slaves. right? 1890, we have white, black, mulatto, which is people who are biracial, Chinese, which is it's significant because of the immigration during the Chinese for the railroads during this time, and then Indian. And for the 1890 sentence, Indian is what we refer to now as Native American. In 1940, so 1890 was just after the Emancipation Proclamation. So now we're in 1940, and we have white, black has changed to Negro, Indian, and then we have Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, Hindu, and Korean, right? So breaking out all those categories, and in 1940 they introduced the other category. If we look 50 years later, when we come into 1990, we have categories of white, now black or Negro, American Indian, which is now to distinguish from the continent of India, Eskimos, Alouette, and then, all these categories, Asian, Pacific Islander, Chinese, Philippine, Hawaiian, Korean, and then in 1990, you could choose other race. And then in 2000, the categories are white, black, African American, or Negro. So we see, the political correctness and the change in the language, too, that plays into the U.S. Census. American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, and they broke out the Asian categories, Native Hawaiian, Guamanian, Chamorro, Samoan, Pacific Islander. And in the year 2000, the census allowed you to choose some other race and then actually print the race that's on here. So what's significant about this, when we look at these racial categories in 2000, that the category of Hispanic or Latino is not on here, right? So let's look at the actual U.S. Census. This is right from the U.S. Census, the 2010 U.S. Census, right? And it says, please note, both answer question 8 about Hispanic origin and question 9 about race. For this sentence, Hispanic origins are not races, right? So if you are Hispanic, you have to choose yes or no, right? Are you Hispanic or not Hispanic? If you're Hispanic, choose the ethnic category of Hispanic or Latino. And then you also have to choose race, right? So if you are Hispanic, you have to choose whether you are white Hispanic, black Hispanic, or one of these other categories. Or what you could do is you could choose some other race and then print a race in. And in the 2000 census, of those who selected other race, 97% also has selected Hispanic as their ethnicity. So, the point of looking at this is that all these categories are man-made, right? We could go back here, we could look at how society has changed the racial categories that the U.S. Census puts out, and we could look at, on an everyday level, most people recognize Hispanic to be their own race. However, the U.S. Census looks at it as an ethnicity, not a race. And they put people into these little boxes and they make you choose. If you're Hispanic, are you white, or are you black, or are you something else? And even if you choose some other race and print Hispanic, someone still code you as one of the races that's listed in chapter 9, in number 9. So we look at how much of this is actually socially constructed, right? No biological basis to this concept. Another thing that's important when we look at society today in the United States is that more and more people have multiple identities, right? And what this means is that, because of interracial, ethnicity, interfaith relationships and marriages, that people have more than one identity, right? For a lot of people, there's no one category that captures their race as defined by the U.S. Census. If we look at this category here, this just looks at what the makeup of the United States is. This is on page 298 in your textbook. And this was updated in 2014. So this is our population standings now. So white non-Hispanic make up 63.3% of our total population. African Americans 12.2, Asian Americans 4.8, and then it goes down from there. And then our ethnic categories. So, white ancestry versus Hispanic ancestry. But again, Hispanics make up 16.7% of the population, but it's kind of a hard number to tabulate because they don't consider it to be a racial group. So how many of the people of Hispanic fit or in this either white or black category too? So that's one of the difficulties when looking at these numbers. Let's look at, so even though these racial categories are constructed by society, society also attaches significance to these and to these categories. And, the consequences of having inequality between the races is real. So when we have inequality between race and ethnicity, it leads to some things, and one of them is stereotypes, right? And stereotypes are these unreliable generalizations about members of a group that don't recognize individual differences within the group, right? So a big important word here is the word unreliable, right? They're unreliable generalizations, right? And they can be dangerous. When people only see people through their stereotypes. And, it can be often used as a basis to justify opportunities and barriers to things. And, stereotypes come from many different places, right? We get stereotypes from parents pass these down, friends pass these down, and also the media, whether, intentionally or not intentionally, creates stereotypes and passes down stereotypes. This is an actual 2 different newspaper articles from the Associated Press right after Hurricane Katrina. And you see the top one, a young man walks through chest-deep floodwater after looting a grocery store in New Orleans, right? And then we have at the bottom, 2 residents wade through chest-deep water after finding bread and soda from a local grocery store, right? So the black person on the top was looting a grocery store where the 2 white people on the bottom were lucky enough to find bread and water after Hurricane Katrina. Right. 2 different authors. Was it intentional? Who knows? But the message is still put out there. These stereotypes are still passed down. So that's really important when we look at the media. Another thing that happens when we look at the inequality between race and ethnicity in the United States is we have prejudice, right? And prejudice is a negative attitude towards an entire group of people. And for the purposes of this chapter, we're talking about racial or ethnic minorities. Whereas discrimination is an action, right? Prejudice is a belief, discrimination is an action. And discrimination is actually when you are denying opportunities and equal rights to people because of prejudice or arbitrary reason, right? The reason behind it is prejudice or something completely arbitrary. And when people are prejudiced, this is what leads to discrimination. Okay? So those are some of our main points when we look at race and ethnicity in chapter 13, and then we're going to further explore in your weekly activity. We're really going to explore this concept of race being socially constructed.